as promised, for today's equipment talk section, we're going to talk about cooking. So, I've shown this before. This is the stove that General Boats provided with the boat, and generally will include with a recycled Rhodes 22, and it is a pretty much generic butane burner. And I said in another video, there's a couple things I don't like about this, a whole bunch. One is that it's kind of cheaply made, just sheet metal, and there's about 100 moving parts, mostly related to safety interlocks, and the failure of any one of those parts would make the stove inoperable, and then what would you do? Well, the other thing I don't like about it is it basically has two settings, very hot and very, very hot. And for boiling water, that's fine, but you know, when I'm cooking my eggs, that's too hot. And I guess a third thing we'll throw out there is it uses these butane cylinders, which, you know, you use them and you throw them away, and there's a lot of trash created. And the world doesn't need any more trash. So, last year, for the most part, this is the stove I was using. And this is, to some extent, a carryover from my backpacking days, in that it's an alcohol stove. Although, you know, this particular unit, I would never have carried backpacking because it's way too heavy. Look at this. But, so this burns denatured alcohol, which is available in any hardware store, certainly Lowe's, Home Depot, that kind of thing. And off of the can will say on it that it's a stove fuel. So I buy this that gallon at a time. Now, true, then I have a gallon container that I have to throw away, but that's that I dispose of in my metal recycling. So hopefully that goes on to another life. So, using either this stove or this stove, I cooked here on the step, which was okay, but I thought I could do something, you know, that might be a little more convenient. So one of the things that initially attracted me to the Rhodes 22 is that it has a decent-sized galley area for a 22-foot boat. Now, obviously, I'd modified this significantly, but I just reused, you know, the space that was already here. So, and of course, that's the standard General Boats provided sink, and this is the refrigerator that I created. And then, excuse me, in between, I've created a cooking area. So, this is all built out of 1/4-inch aluminum and some nuts and bolts. And when it's not being used, it's all flush, so that it's just, you know, counter area. But when we want to, we can cook here using that same alcohol stove. So here we've got the stove and some paraphernalia, and to use the stove, we'll remove that central cover, and then we can just drop the stove into this hole. Let me just pull this out and we can take a look at this. So there's two concentric rings of aluminum here, and that creates a kind of depression here. I know I'm doing a poor job of explaining this, but that will fit the stove just like that. So but we need to be able to support pots over the flame of the stove. And we've got two different ways of doing that. For smaller pots, specifically in my case, my tea kettle, I've got this pot support made out of hardware cloth. And this, again, is a concept that comes straight out of backpacking. This is a pretty common type of pot support because it does the job. It'll hold up a pot, and it weighs almost nothing, which doesn't matter here, but still, I was able to reuse that idea. For larger pots, like the frying pan I cook my eggs in, that would work, but it's a little small and shaky. So instead, I've got holes drilled through the aluminum and tapped, and I can thread in these 4 legs. I could shorten these a little bit and make them quicker to thread in. That's more thread than we need, obviously. These are tapered and pointy at the top to minimize heat transfer from the pot to the rest of the stove, which too much heat loss creates a problem. So I've used this a couple of times, and I'm happy to report that using it does not set the boat on fire. So as I said, we're coming up to dinner time, so you'll get to see it in action right now. Oh, one little feature that I neglected to point out is with the stove in place, the top cabinet drawer cannot be used. The stove hangs down into the drawer space. So probably no one would put up with that except me. But all right, so here's the alcohol stove with its cover removed. There's a little bit of alcohol in it, but we'll add some more. I'm not sure how much this will take, but generally you add a little bit every time you use it. So tonight for dinner we're having chicken and rice with vegetables, one of those backpacking type dehydrated meals that I dehydrated myself. So first things we need to do is put some water in the pot and then the meal in the water. Alright, there's our meal, and as I mentioned, this is a meal that I dehydrated, and that's true for all the ingredients except for the white blobs you see floating around, which are chicken, and those are freeze-dried, which I bought, as freeze-dried chicken, because I've discovered that you can't really dehydrate chicken and have it turn into something that you actually want to eat. At least there's no method that I've found. Anyway, so on we go. So next step is to light the stove, which is pretty easy, and that's definitely going. You don't want to put your hand too low over that. The flames are largely invisible in daylight. All right, so there we go. We'll put the pot on the stove, excuse me, and a cover on the pot. So that's bubbling away. Actually, it was bubbling a couple of minutes ago, and I added some fresh broccoli from the refrigerator, which set it back and came to a boil a second time. The full elapsed time is around 9 minutes. So we'll now take this off the stove and wrap it up in a beach towel for about half an hour. All right, well, now that the stove is really going, the flames are much more apparent. Generally, to put this out, I'll use, this is a simmering apparatus, which I rarely use, but anyway, it'll put the stove out like that. So while we're waiting for the dehydrated meal to rehydrate, we'll be snacking on some veggies. Got some celery that came from the grocery store, but we got carrots and cucumber that came from our garden, actually from a little greenhouse we have. And after half an hour of rehydrating, there's our meal ready to eat.